Good afternoon. My name is Daniel Baller. I'm the Director of Fiscal Services for Sultan School District. I want to thank you for taking time to view this presentation and hope you find it helpful in understanding the levy propositions that will be on the ballot April 26th of 2022. Let's begin by talking about some basic terminology that we use in the school funding realm. Things such as AV, which is used to express assessed value of real property. CAS, which we're referring to Certificated Administrators. CIS, Certificated Instructional Staff, or also known as teachers. CLA, Classified Administrators, that oversee departments such as maintenance and operations, transportation, technology, finance, human resources, and so forth. CLS, which are referred to as Classified Support Staff, important individuals who oversee things such as our paraeducators, custodians, child nutrition workers, office staff, and the like. CN, it stands for Child Nutrition, also known as a food service worker. CY will be indicating calendar year. Taxes are assessed via a calendar year method. DNR, which stands for Department of Natural Resources. FTE, which is for full-time equivalency. FY, fiscal year. Our fiscal year runs from September 1st through August 31st of each year. LEA, which stands for Local Effort Assistance. M designation would be for millions of dollars. M&O would be maintenance and operations. And P.S.F.M stands for Prototypical School Funding Model. The next slide goes over continuation of some specific terms and not just acronyms or abbreviations, things such as apportionment. We refer to this as the monthly allocation of state resources that we receive on the last working day of each month. Categorical, these are state monies that support specific programs targeted towards special education, learning assistance, transitional bilingual, highly capable, and so forth. McCleary was a court decision circa 2012 that determined that the Washington State Legislature had failed its constitutional obligation to fully fund basic education. Regionalization factor. It's a multiplier applied to funded amounts in recognition of districts with higher costs of operations. SCAP or SCAP, which stands for School Construction Assistance Program. And finally, SPED, otherwise known as special education. In school funding, we have our revenue, or what we also call sources. We have basically three primary and then a fourth that is secondary. Our federal revenues, which are made up of grants and one-time support. You may have heard the CARES ESSER money that has come into over the last couple of years in response to COVID-19, accounts for about 9% of our overall revenue stream. State resources make up the bulk at about 79%. This would be our apportionment, and special purposes or our categorical funding, which would make up that. Local, which is made up of two components, both tax, which would be the local property or levy, and then DNR and also LEA, which are tax-related revenues and collectible only if, and if is the key, a voted levy is in place for a given year. And then we also have non-tax collections, collections for fees for goods and services. And then finally, at 2% is what we call transfers. Our current capital projects levy funds technology and several support staff and related training. There, to cover the cost of those, a 2% revenue transfer happens between our capital projects fund back to general fund to reimburse for those expenditures. Next, we move on to what's called the Prototypical School Funding Model. This was adopted into law back in 2010, so it's over a decade old, and there is the RCW that is referenced to that, but it establishes the number, and I underline the word number of staff. How many staff are funded for a prototypical size school? What you might say, what is a prototypical size school? Well, it's defined in statute as an elementary school with 400 students. Now note, those 400 students must be in kindergarten through 6th grade. We are a district that has our elementary schools as kindergarten through 5th grade, so a distinction there, a little bit of difference. Secondly, middle school. Middle school needs to contain 432 students in grades 7 and 8. Note, we are a 3-grade middle school of 6, 7, and 8, so again, a little bit of a disconnect from the way the prototypical school model is set up to the way our district is set up. And then high school matches what we do in grades 9 through 12. You should have 600 students. Important note, the prototypical school funding model, as its name implies, is a funding, not a staffing model. And you might say, well, what does that mean? What it does is it determines how many funded positions you get. It does not say that you have to hire that number of corresponding staff, but provides to you a revenue stream of which to hire staff for the individual needs of a given district. Well, next logical question might be, well, how many staff do we get? Well, there's a section entitled School Generated. So for elementary, based on the prototypical school model that we just touched on in the last slide, for Sultan Elementary School, SES, and Gold Bar Elementary, GBE, we see the various different allocations as far as the number of funded positions. And then in parentheses, you see the actual number of positions that are staffed, because as we had mentioned before, the prototypical school funding model is just that, a funding model, not a staffing model. However, for our purposes here, it's very important to see the difference between the amount that the district is funded for and the amount that they're actually staffed at. In some instances, you see the prototypical school funding model does a pretty good job in aligning funded amounts with staffing amounts. However, in others, examples such as school nurses and psychologists, it falls woefully short of the actual needs of a district, and therefore the district must supplement to staff toward the needs of its students. Next slide then transitions to the middle school. Middle school, again, it goes into the various funded amounts, and you can see when we start to get to middle and then again here in high school, which will be the next slide, we start to see that the prototypical school funding model does not do as good a job in truly allocating resources based on what is needed. Example, principal, vice principal, they fund for 0.942, which is less than 1, and we have 2, and a principal and assistant principal at the middle school. Guidance counselors, you can see 0.8, and we have 1. Nurses and psychologists, again, woefully underfunded for the actual needs of our students. Teaching assistants as well, and so on and so on. Looking then at the high school, principals, vice principals, 1.127, we have 2. Guidance counselors, 1.522, and we have 3. Nurses, psychologists, social workers, again, extremely low funded amounts relative to the amount of staffing that is necessary to adequately address the needs of our students. And then as far as from district-wide support, in the district office, obviously we have positions and people that are not tied directly to a given building. So things such as technology. In technology, we're funded for just over 1 position, and we have 3.2 positions necessary to address the technological needs of our students in their buildings. Facilities maintenance grounds, 3.3, and we have almost twice that number at 6. Warehouse laborers, central administrators, and central classified staff, again, the funded amount significantly below what is necessary to adequately staff and run a district. So the outcomes of the prototypical school funding model. The model does not provide enough staff to adequately address student learning loss as a result of the most recent 2 years and the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. The model does not provide enough staff to adequately address the social emotional needs of those same students. And it does not adequately staff to a level to address the health and wellness needs of the students. In short, the prototypical school funding model just doesn't provide enough staff to adequately run a school district in most areas. However, as was mentioned before, it does a better job at elementary than at secondary, but overall still falls short. Then we turn our attention to the McCleary Decision, as we had mentioned earlier, clarifying what that was as a court decision again back in 2012. Fast forward, and it took almost 6 years for the Supreme Court to find that Washington State to be in compliance with that decision. And as a result, the funded amounts increased for staff, but not in many cases enough to attract and retain. Example, in 2021-22, which is our current fiscal year, statewide funding for classified or support staff is $49,453 per year. This then is multiplied by a district's regionalization factor. In our instance, we are what is considered an 18% district. Therefore, to give you the total amount of funding that you would receive for each funded classified individual, you would take the amount, the $49,453, multiply it by 18%, and come up with $58,355. Note again, regionalization does vary from district to district. So let's take an opportunity to look at some current examples of how this state funding falls woefully short of the ability to attract and retain quality individuals. The first example would be at Snohomish School District. Currently, they have an open position entitled the Director of Human Resource Services. This is a classified position, and so for their district, like in all districts, the state funding amount does not vary, at where we see the $49,453. However, the regionalization, which I had mentioned previously, can vary from district to district. Theirs is actually higher than ours at 20% versus our 18%. Therefore, for that particular position, they are funded the $49,453 times 20% or $59,344. As you can see, they are offering for this particular position a salary range of $149,865 to a high range of $159,383. If you utilize the high range of this salary range, you can see that the difference between the salary that will need to be paid for this individual versus the amount of funding received for this position exceeds $100,000. The most likely funding source for this shortfall would be the district's local levy. Continuing on and looking to a district to the north, Arlington School District currently has an open Director of Technology position. This as well is a classified position. It has, as well, the funding does not change, it stays consistent at $49,453. However, Arlington happens to be a 16% regionalization district. Therefore, the total amount received in funding for this position would be $57,365. They are offering a salary for this particular position to attract and retain someone of $160,758, or a difference of almost $104,000 between the funded amount and the salary being offered. And again, local levy would be the source of that difference. Snoqualmie Valley, interestingly, they have the same exact position open as Arlington does, and they're looking as well for a Director of Technology Services. The state funding amount, again, always stays the same at $49,453. Snoqualmie Valley as well is a regionalization district at 18%, just like Sultan. Therefore, that gives them a total state funding amount of $58,355. The salary range being offered for this particular position, as you can see, $146,759 to $160,801, creating again a disconnect between funded amount and salary amount of over $100,000, of which their local levy is most likely the source that will cover that difference. So you might say, well, how does that apply to us? Let's look at a group, a significant group for us, meaning teachers. School districts don't exist without teachers. Therefore, they are a critical component of us being able to do the work that we are charged to do. For certificated individuals, we get a little bit higher state funding amount, or what they call the average teacher statewide teacher salary of $68,937. Regionalization is 18%, again, for our district, which gives total state funding per FTE of $81,346. However, in our area, to attract and retain quality teachers, it costs us an average teacher in our district is $94,494, or a difference between funded amount and salary amount of just over $13,000. The funding source for this, again, is local levy. Now, clarifying what is an average teacher. An average teacher in our district is one that has a bachelor's plus 90 additional credits and approximately 13 years of teaching experience. So the McCleary Reality, as shown in the prior examples, I think it's very clear that districts statewide, including ourselves, are having to supplement state funding significantly to attract and retain quality staff due to the inadequacies of the funding model. Contrary to what was promoted, the McCleary Decision, while helpful, still falls far short of fully funding basic education. Hence, because of the prototypical school model and the shortfalls therein, and the shortfalls in the McCleary Decision, the two factors added together, hence the need for local levies. Well, you might say, okay, well, what is a levy? Well, an overview, it's in its basic, most simple form, is a local property tax passed by voters. It can be up to 4 years in duration, and they're unique in that they are for a given amount, not a rate. This is unique for schools. They can be flat, meaning that they're unchanged. They can be increasing from year to year at either an increase or decreasing rate, or they can decrease over their duration. The rate per $1,000 of assessed value, or AV, is used to produce the total amount is estimated. The rates cannot exceed $2.50 of assessed value per $1,000 of assessed value, or $2,741.58 per student, whichever is less. And then it also talks about some factors that can affect how taxes are actually applied to individual homeowners, as far as the assumptions that are being used and the way of which new homes come into your taxable rolls. Well, you might say, well, how does Sultan compare to other neighboring districts? Well, this graph here basically clearly shows from the highest, being Snohomish School District, to the lowest, ourselves in Sultan, the great disparity between districts. Snohomish, you can see that there are various colors to the bars. EPO levy, or what is our Proposition 1, is in the blue. A capital levy, which is our Proposition 2, is in the orange. And if a district has voted bonds, it would be in the gray. Now, as you can see, Sultan, we only have both a blue and an orange component to the bar because we have no voted bonds. The voted bonds were fully redeemed in December of 2017, and the district has not had any approved bonds since that point in time. So you can see that our taxation is very comparable to all other districts within our geographic region. So that brings us to the propositions that are going to be put before you, the voters, in April. Proposition number 1 is a replacement educational programs and operation levy, or what we call an EPO levy. In summarizing it, it's going to be for 4 years, the collections of which will occur 2023 through 2026. The estimated rate, because again, we had talked about previously, levies are for an amount, not a rate. So we estimate the rate at $1.50 per $1,000 in assessed value, which is no change from the current estimate. The levy collections would be revenues that would be delivered into our general fund, which is known as Fund 10. And a clarification that there was a article in the Linwood Times back in February of this year where it was confusing to some that the way that it was written is that people inferred that the levy was in addition to our budget. However, it is not in addition to, but is an integral part of, again, that 10% component that we spoke of earlier of our budget. Voted levies allow for collection of associated revenues, or what we call those DNR, Department of Natural Resource Revenues, which is estimated at $1.15 million for our fiscal current year, 21-22. And finally, since 2018, local levy collections have to be spent on what are called enrichment activities, offerings, and related staffing to provide said services to their students. Well, you might say, well, what does Prop 1 pay for? What do we get for this? Well, areas of significant utilization of levy dollars, and you can see that levy is in quotation marks because when we talk about levy, it's not only the voted amount, but again, those associated revenues, the DNR revenues, or what we call LEA, or local effort assistance, is included in the total levy dollars. So things such as special education, our school resource officer and district-wide security, extra and co-curricular activities. Again, extra and co-curricular are 100% funded by local levy. You receive no state or federal assistance for extra or co-curricular activities at about $500,000. Certificated staffing, teachers and administration, classified staffing at over $1.1 million. Again, really reinforcing the shortfalls in both the prototypical school funding model and in the McCleary decision, requiring high reliance on local levies to fill those gaps in those two models. Material supplies and operating costs, or what we call MSOC, and finally, transportation shortfalls. Well, the next logical question might be, well, if Prop 1 doesn't pass in April, what might happen? Well, the following graph basically goes over a possible scenario of the impacts both to services and, more importantly, to staff. You can see estimated staff reductions for fiscal year 22-23 in the pink would be about 25.7 positions estimated. The following year, in 23-24, we would also see additional impacts of another 8 positions. So the total impact over 2 years would be the 25.7 plus the 8. Also, there would include complete elimination of the extra co-curricular, because as we had said previously, those are wholly funded by local levy dollars. If a local levy does not exist, those programs would not exist. Proposition number 2, capital levies for safety, critical infrastructure, technology, and transportation facility. Now, as you recall, back in 2018, our citizens approved a capital projects levy, which was purely for technology. And we have been successfully implementing and upgrading our technology district-wide as a result of approval of that measure. Its subsequent measure here that will be on the ballot in April is for a duration of 4 years, for 2023 through 2026. An estimated rate, again, all rates are estimated amounts, we levy to an amount, not a rate, estimated at 95 cents per $1,000 in assessed valuation. Collections are deposited into the Capital Projects Fund, or Fund 20. And what it's going to do is it's going to allow for the continuation of those technology upgrades, again, as I had mentioned earlier, that were began in 2018. It also allows new funding for repairs and replacement of district-wide infrastructure that has exceeded its usable life. And it also allows for replacement of our current maintenance and transportation facility, which was recently condemned by the city of Sultan. To aid in that process, passage of this proposition will allow for the district to collect $4 million in state funding that otherwise would not be available to it should this proposition not be successful. So what would happen if it isn't passed by voters in April? Well, the technology and the progress that we have made over the last 4 years would not allow to be continued, and the current infrastructure would begin to become technically obsolete. Again, these long-standing repairs, upgrades, and replacements that are vital to the district could not be addressed, which would adversely affect the educational environment of students. And then, as I touched on before, forfeiture of approximately $4 million in state assistance to aid in building that replacement structure to replace ours, which is currently condemned by the city. And a total revenue loss of about $3.2 million. This, again, includes the $700,000 in lost DNR revenues. We talked about the Department of Natural Resource Revenues as a levy associated. If a levy is approved and on the books, then the associated DNR revenues can be collected. However, if it is not, those revenues are forfeited, and so there would be an approximate estimated loss of about $700,000 by not having a levy on the books. And then finally, what's the overall tax impact? Well, the district already, we are in the 4th year of the levy measure that was voted on in 2018. It ran for years 2019 through 2022. And it currently has a rate for this year in total between the two of $2.07. The breakout for that is general fund is $1.55 per $1,000 of AV, and capital projects fund is 52 cents per $1,000 of AV. These are actual rates. As we had said, when measures are proposed to the voters, they are estimated rates. However, each year then that is turned into an actual rate based on the assessed value by the levy comptroller. The proposed Prop 1 and Prop 2 combined have an estimated rate of $2.45, which again is the $1.50 for Proposition 1 and the 95 cents for Proposition 2. The total, the $2.45, would be a 38-cent increase over the combined total currently in 2022. And the source for those is the Snohomish County Assessor Annual Report for calendar year 2022. I hope you found this presentation helpful in understanding some of the basic concepts of both the prototypical school funding model and the McCleary decision. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, Daniel Baller, at the Sultan School District office, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have. Take care.